All right, everybody. For whoever is rejoining us, we had a technical difficulty happen where our system went down. We are back up and running and ready to go. So we appreciate everyone's patience, and hopefully you'll be able to find this video. I know how frustrating it can be when things go down and having to like re-find stuff. So, but we stopped where we were, and we are going to continue right where we left off a minute ago. So without further ado, we're going to keep on rocking and rolling. Please let us know if you found us, and if you know any of your friends that come on with you, try to find and have a way to communicate with them that there's a new feed. Let them know. So, but we're going to keep on moving.
All right, we've got some folks joining us back.
Hey!
Ah,
That's awesome. I was scared we lost all of you.
Thank you for coming back.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming back. We hate that technology can be so frustrating sometimes.
We were just talking about like,
Yes.
oh, how the good parts of technology.
Yeah, we were. See, here's the bad parts. We were like, how awesome is the good parts of technology, that it connects us with the world, but it can also completely disconnect you with the world right at the drop of a hat. So thanks for all of you who are patient enough to stay with us and not go to bed, that are like across the world. Bear with us as it goes. I think Kelly, my team member, is going to put out something also on Instagram to let everyone know that it's all rocking and rolling.
in case you needed any reminder that we're all artists and not technicians.
Not technicians. Oh, nothing could be farther or more truthful than that. Sometimes I have to keep reminding myself, I'm massing stuff in. Don't try to start doing detail work.
Mm-hmm.
Just seeing if that's going to be enough to carry this through. Lower this down. See, this part of the stage, I'm more thinking compositionally, of just like, how's it going to fit the page well, and making sure that it's migrating through the painting really well. That flow we're talking about. Erica, do you find, speaking of flow, do you find yourself that it is easy for you to get yourself into flow, that flow state of thinking where time kind of just flies by and feels like it's standing still to you? Or do you find it very difficult to like try to tap into it?
I think it varies from day to day.
Mm-hmm.
Some days it's harder, some days it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it depends on the stage of the painting.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
For example, today I was in one of the later stages where, in a different painting, and was trying to finish it, wrap it up, and it required a lot of intense focus in like different areas of the painting.
Mm-hmm.
So having to jump from area to area,
Mm-hmm.
but still have that intensity of control and focus, and really wrap things up nicely.
Yeah.
and I found it in that stage, it can be a little bit more difficult to focus because I'm, bouncing around a bit, and versus the beginning, I find it's really energetic, and it's easy to kind of get really wrapped up in the process. And so, in general.
Yeah.
But overall, I find like once I get started, it ends up it all melts away, and I can get into it. So
I feel
it's
like,
all about getting started.
didn't Da Vinci have a quote about something like that, that the hardest thing to do is to start? I feel
I've
like,
heard the quote. I don't know who said it, but I've definitely heard that quote.
yeah, and it's just like in most quotes that somebody said it in some version of an iteration that was different than another person, but it's been said kind of multiple times or something. I feel like
Lewis Carr original.
I think that you heard it here first, folks, on East Oak Studios live stream. So glad you tuned into the second one, because you didn't know you were going to get such gems and nuggets.
Exactly. Never been heard before.
Oh, goodness. So it was funny because I did a lecture recently for Portrait Society called The Riff, and how to steal like an artist, meaning how to be influenced by your heroes, and how to pay them homage to the stuff you do, but make your stuff still feel original as you riff off of their work. And I used the quote that that is often referred to from Picasso, which is, good artists borrow, great artists steal. But that quote was actually done earlier by T.S. Eliot, and it was done in slightly a different way. And then T.S. Eliot had found it from somebody else. And all of these people are famous people, and it goes all the way back to like 1600 somewhere. And then on top of that, one of my favorite is Banksy took it, and all of them have switched the words just a little bit. And so like Banksy put it on a stone and did the same thing, but changed like 2 words in it slightly, and then scratched out Picasso's name and put his instead, which is like the perfect, final iteration of it. But anyway, I found that to be so much fun, because even the phrase itself has been stolen multiple times. A lot of irony there.
I find it helpful in those days where it is more difficult to kind of get into flow state, or get, it sounds so cliche, but really taking it all one step at a time,
Mm-hmm.
and like setting one goal,
Yep.
and like, taking one bite, slowly. And I find that once I think of things that way, it's a lot easier.
Even just the idea of telling somebody, just start something somewhere, that just to going
Yeah.
right off of what you're saying, is if you can find just a starting point, you would be amazed at how far you can get with tapping into flow. Because most people feel that it's just the opposite. It's like the tail wagging the dog, where you need to be inspired, or get yourself be in flow in order to work, when you have to work in order to get into flow. So
There's that other quote that I don't know who said it, but it's like, inspiration finds you working.
Oh yeah, that's.
There's a lot of truth in that. I don't know who said that.
I know that Chuck Close had something that's similar to that he was said something like, inspiration is for amateurs, but the real artists just go to work, which is a very a more clunky way of saying the way you said, because your way actually is much more distilled, concise, and I think accurate to the essence. Yes. You heard it here, folks. It was Erica Arcudi who said that on the Oil Painting from Life 33.2.
I wish I could take credit for such a concise statement, but alas.
All right, okay, see, I have them roughly where I want at least the flowers now, and kind of the size of them, regardless of if it's perfect. I always go back to what Michael Klein would always say. you know, if the thing feels truthful in a certain way, you know, you can push and pull things to make sure that they are representing the beauty well, you know. So, so for right now, I'm stating this is kind of where at least that is, and then I can. What is the deal tonight? All right, I'm going to turn that off. And Erica, turn your mic off.
Okay.
And then turn. Boom. And put your headphone on there. There you go.
Okay, folks, we've got our audio back. Thank you so much.
Tonight is the night of glitches.
Thank you so much for your patience.
There is some spring juju going on.
So we have a question from Paul who asks, what do you think about using ivory black, as some artists steer clear of it because of the high oil content, especially if you're painting in layers?
So at Florence Academy, we used a lot of ivory black in our limited palette, you know, grisaille, and even our... I'm always averse to rules where it's like you can't use this color. And so I think you might experience it sinking in because of that very fact, but it's not that you can't use it. You know, it's just knowing, okay, maybe when you're painting and something dries and it looks ashy, you're not trusting that value as it is. You know it's going to be a little bit darker, you know, if you had oiled it out or something like that, or if you varnish it. So I think it's just learning, you know, how to use your pigments and how to adjust with them. So I think that it's, in many cases, it's totally appropriate to use. So
yeah, I agree exactly what she said. You know, it's really knowing how to control your color, and the oil content of it really depends on, you know, brand to brand, you know, how much they feel that it's necessary to put oil to pigment ratio. You know, some brands put a lot of oil to the pigment ratio and some don't. So it just depends. So many times it just depends. But I think, like, and it's kind of going off with what Erica said, it also really comes down to treating it like a color. Don't treat it like a non-color to use to darken things, but you're treating it as a low chromatic blue.
I think that's exactly right.
Okay,
right.
everybody, we are back, hopefully audible. We had some issues with our microphones, because what else could go wrong? Thank you so much for your patience, and we're going to get right back into it.
Just when I was talking about flow, there is no flow happening here.
This is a test of how easily you can get back into the flow state.
Yeah, right.
So I think when we left off, we were in the process of answering Paul's question about using ivory black, although some artists tend not to use it just because of high oil content. Do you guys want to dive back into that?
Yes, because we didn't. That never was said because the
Our audio
audio is going wonky, right?
Yep.
Well, we can just kind of recap,
Do a recap.
just in case.
I'm just going to keep
So-
testing to make sure everything's working.
We were basically saying that there's not really a rule that says like you can't use ivory black, and I find that that kind of approach isn't very helpful. I think that as long as you know how to use the pigment, then it's totally fine. And for example, knowing its tendencies, yes, it might have a tendency to sink in due to its high oil content, but that doesn't mean that, for example, you just know how to work with it better. You just know that, as something dries and it sinks in, okay, I can't trust my values in the darks necessarily. Secondly, I think Lewis was going to say that also maybe some people think that it tends to gray things out, but if you don't use it just to merely darken something, use it as a low chroma blue, then you will be less likely to just make everything gray and have it bleed into your other mixtures too much. I think that
That's
recaps
perfect.
what we were saying.
It's perfect. Yeah, just the idea that treat it as another color, and you will be in a good spot.
And we've got another question from Carolina. What are your thoughts on manufacturing items with images of your paintings? Calendars, scarves, prints, etc. I'm fortunate enough to have fabulous collectors buying out my work, but I can only paint so fast.
It is a dilemma. Meaning about you can only do so much work, you can only make so much at once.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I think it depends. I think that there are ways of using your work in other ways and ways of making it a nice thing, I think it just depends on how you do it.
Yeah, there's definitely people that have tried putting their artwork on other things. There's plenty of people that do prints of their stuff as well, and so there's lots of precedent out there. I mean, Teresa Oaxaca was making prints on leggings. So there's people you can ask that have that experience if that's a route you want to go. I think that it depends on how you want to brand yourself. But also, if you're creating work and the work is selling, and you're starting to develop a name in a certain area, I do think that you should just ask a lot of questions to a lot of people who have experience before you start diving too deep into something, because sometimes you might shift your brand in a direction that all of a sudden you might not want to go. And so it might be important to figure out what's a good step in those directions. But prints, I think, is very safe. Like if you wanted to go experiment with printing your work and selling more of that on Instagram, that's a good way to scale things. But I think the more important thing to think about there is, do you have an audience for that? Because there's definitely a point at which it's a good return on investment, and oftentimes people don't have quite the following yet that they think they should, in order to, or that they should, in order to be able to support it being worth your time, you know, because you have to, in order to hit a certain range of profitability for it, you have to hire and outsource a little bit, and you know there's a lot of people to pay, and so it's worth most certainly worth exploring, and then just weighing your options of if it's right for you. So it's a good question though. There's definitely people out there that are doing very, very well with their prints. You know, I think of people like Mark Maggiore, who is a Western painter, and he actually petitions to his audience of what print he should make next, which I think is a very interesting way of handling that situation.
And I know too, like, you know, I think every artist has their own different approach towards prints. I always personally really appreciate when artists create a limited edition print run that is somehow then like customized by hand, whether it's like a portion of it is like maybe gilded or drawn on top of it, like creating its own unique surface, even though it's a print. Yeah, I don't know. There's all kinds of different ways that you can like spruce up a print to be marketable for you and get creative with it.
It's true.
Jackson asks, what's everyone's favorite art book? Do you have any strong recommendations?
Like art book in terms of technique and instructional book, or artist/art history book?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
the answer
I
is
think
yes.
all of the above.
Give yours of two categories.
I need to think about it.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I think there's some really great ones out there, and I think that at different times in my life, different ones have been very helpful for me, like to learn interesting color ideas. I think that back in the day, I would read Richard Smith's Alla Prima 2 book because he has a lot of good color swatches for mixing color. There's the Solomon J. Solomon book that has some really solid information in it. And lately, I've been diving into Harold Speed's books on oil painting and drawing, and they have some really just very good sound nuggets in there that I find to be helpful.
Yeah, Harold Speed's always what we recommend at Florence Academy.
Oh yeah? See? There you go.
Harold Speed, and then Carlson's Guide to Landscape Paintings,
Yep.
also really good. Really good to read, not just if you're a landscape painter. So really good descriptions and explanations in that book that go beyond just landscape painting.
Mm.
As far as like art theory and criticism and analysis goes, my personal favorite is one that I gifted Louis a copy for Christmas. It's called Ways of Seeing by John Berger. It's short, sweet, and fantastic. Highly recommend.
And as far as just books that I have found over the years that I just love to look at, you know, I don't have a huge collection. but I have the 2 set of William Bouguereau's books. That was like one of my first big investments, was those 2 books, and they are a big investment, but they are so good at looking at a large amount of different variety of paintings. One that I don't have in my collection is there's several Sargent books that are really great because he was so good at gesture and creating really incredibly interesting compositions with portraits while still being like commissions that I think that I would recommend people to have if you're in the portrait painting world, that you should have that in your library. Yep. Thank you.
One book that, so back when I was teaching the 6 weeks course at the Florence Academy, Melissa Sanchez, my boss, would always bring in her Emil Carlson book, and that's something that I want to get.
And we have been talking about Emil
A lot
here lately, because I just love his work, and Erica loves it too, and so we've been talking about him for quite a bit, and he's got some incredible stuff out there. He's an artist I discovered later. He's been around forever, and a lot of people know him. But it's funny because like you then go, oh, everyone's talking about this guy. I don't know who they're talking about, and then you go and look, and you're like, oh, this is the reason they're talking about him. He's amazing, you know. So, oh, I also have a William Truss Richards book that I love. It's great for like landscape compositions and seascape compositions. So, all right. I actually might paint on flowers. I'm sitting here, feel like I'm avoiding it with what I'm like, how I'm putting all this in over here. But all intentional, people. It's all part of the show. That's what I just keep telling myself. I'm building up to the prestige.
Got to create some anticipation there.
Yep, exactly.
We haven't had enough of that tonight.
Yeah, we hadn't had any of that tonight. Oh goodness, I'm so glad that people are patient, forgiving, and just limping along with us in this world called technology.
Well, that's actually a great segue to Edward's question. Edward says, hello, I'm just curious on what you guys think on the recent development of AI art, such as Midjourney. What kind of job will be in danger first? I have a daytime job and want to transition to more digital art, animation, and illustration related jobs. But now I'm afraid, especially seeing what Midjourney can do.
Yeah.
It is tricky. The first thing I thought of was concept design. And for example, in like video games or movies, things like that. That's where I feel like I worry about it taking into those positions. And I think it's really cool to have the human element, the human design element to something, more of the human touch. So I hope that it doesn't take that away from those industries.
Yeah, I mean, this is a steep topic, but I think that number one, it's only going to get more powerful. It's not going to get less. Right now, I don't think a person's digital art world is in jeopardy. It's just going to look very different. It's going to be how good are you at creating prompts, and how good are you at explaining to the AI system what it is you want, and then knowing how to manipulate it further. And I think that that's where a lot of it's going. So it can be helpful, but it definitely is going to take, well, in best case scenario, it's going to help you riff off of it to create really interesting stuff. Worst case scenario is that it will it'll be more about learning how to explain to AI what you want it to do, and so those artistic jobs, might look very, very, very different. But I don't think that in the near future that you're like in too much jeopardy. But I do think in not too far down the line, it's going to look very, very, very different. Okay.
I tend to, I don't know, I'm not much of an optimist everywhere in my life, but here I tend towards optimism of, the presence of AI art hopefully delineating the importance of traditional art and techniques and study in preserving the tradition that we have, and not sacrificing it for, the convenience of being able to achieve a polished product at, any given second.
Yep. Sometimes these things have a way of being a pendulum swing back to people liking the human condition and the human touch in things. Because even if it's AI art, it will still be identified as AI art, and we'll still be able to know if it's kind of CGI. Not all the time. I mean, there's some of it that the photography side of it looks like it's like nailing some stuff pretty well. And like I said, it's only going to get better. But yes, my hope is that just like when we AI has been around for a very long time. It's just it looked different earlier, and so people, as things progressed, they didn't call it AI anymore, and but it's been around since like the 90s. And so, like, for example, when the computer started to beat chess, and it would beat some of the best in the world, they were scared that it was going to just like make everyone not play chess anymore, because now there's a computer that can beat all humans. And in fact, it did just the opposite. It made more people lean into being interested in the game than it made less. So on the optimistic side of hope, I hope that what it does is it allows for people to have an opportunity to be more creative and to figure out new ways of creating things that are even more interesting than we had ever thought before, because the advancements of people being able to play chess at a higher level has been highly developed because of computers being able to play against computers on your own desktop, So maybe here's to hope. What I don't think it'll do is artists who are like doing what we do. What people do love is the human hand and the human touch. And so I really think that we won't be able to take that. They won't be able to get rid of that. That will continue to be there because people want the human condition into some of their creations that are physical. So my hope there is that it actually will allow people to want to really lean into things that are made with human hands even more and value it more because of the fact that it wasn't done from a machine. Because if the law of diminishing returns rings true, then that will always be a thing, is that the value of that kind of work will continue to diminish, but they'll be able to see the human hand in something like painting. So, so I really don't think that what we do is necessarily in danger. In fact, I think it'll actually help enhance people's appreciation for what we do, because less people will be doing it and more people will see the value of what it takes to do it. I hope. What do y'all think? And push back if you want. I'm all about pushback.
I mean, I would tend to agree with that. Yeah. I think it can recontextualize the value of the artist's hand and the time invested in the work.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even make traditional art more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, is it TFL if I don't do
Hey,
that?
oh. So, Lewis, as you're starting to block in this first bloom,
Mm-hmm.
what are you thinking about in terms of process and trying to sculpt the form early on?
Great question. I think the first things I'm thinking about is trying to create the color harmony range in the flower, and then kind of thinking about the context of the environment around it. And I'll kind of work some of the environment color in its relationship to each other, but I'm not going to get incredibly detailed, but I am thinking about the overall form that the light's coming from the right. And so therefore there's a high chroma spot, there's sort of a lightest moment spot, there is a low chroma spot, and there is a darkest spot. And then everything else I'm kind of building around that idea as I go around the flower of kind of a hierarchy of value. And then later I'm going to go in and kind of push and pull it, but I keep it pretty loose. I'm not thinking too heavily about how the petals are falling. I'm thinking more about like how it's getting darker in some areas and warmer in some areas and cooler in some areas. And then the harmony of that is, I think, more important to me, to creating the flower to feel real.
And Erica, what are you thinking about right now as you're starting to block in some of the foliage?
I am thinking about my values, and I'm thinking about how can I imply more than get too wrapped up into details right now. I am aware of my limited time that I have, even though I might work on this after camera.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Anyway, I want to be more abbreviated, so I'm trying to just look at big masses of values and not get too caught up in details, and really try to imply everything with my brush rather than get too fussy with it. I can always paint over and work into what I put down, and so I'm trying to just think quickly and think big picture, and think often how things are connected and not how things are different. That's something I have to really remind myself as I'm working through this stage. So it's very easy for me to just break everything up, so I'm actively trying not to do that.
The other thing that I'm thinking about is if I have a limited amount of time, then the one thing I don't want to do is just be completely heavily focused on like one flower, because I could spend the rest of the time on this one flower, and because of that, I try to have perspective of the whole, and so it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to get these colors kind of down, then I'm going to go into the next one and do the exact same thing and kind of bring all of them up to this speed and kind of give them a bit of a feeling of not finished, but sort of completion of this stage.
Like everything's at the same level.
Yep, exactly. So if everything's at the same level, then that can be very, very helpful for being economical with my time. Flowers are so much fun though. There's so many different little colors and shades and tints.
I like them.
Erica is becoming quite the master of flowers
Well.
here. She is just rocking and rolling in the world of flowers. Y'all got to check out her Instagram. Is it Erica Arcudi?
Erica Arcudi Fine Art.
Fine art. Check it out.
Thank you for the plug.
She's working on some amazing stuff. She'll be continuing to post some of the stuff she's working on, I'm sure, in the near future. But it's fun to see her work.
Fun connection.
Yeah.
So the roses that are in the setup were roses that I painted about a month ago.
Yeah.
And I've kept them in the fridge this whole time, and they just have been preserved in the fridge beautifully, looking like we just cut them, and they in fact have been in the fridge for a month.
Which is just so incredible. I just can't believe that.
Yeah, these roses are like super roses. Let's see, Sam says, it's awesome seeing the process on these paintings. And B. Gill asks, speaking of books, do you have a list of favorite fine art titles posted somewhere? Or do you know where there's a list of useful titles? I have trouble finding books for painters versus public. I personally don't know of a list anywhere, but if you're able to find one, I'd be curious to take a look at it.
One person that I tend to, if I have questions like that I want to find a resource for, the blog Gurney Journey. He is a guy named James Gurney, and he has a fantastic art blog where he just blogs about everything. And there's always a fascinating nugget of something or a resource that I didn't know about before. And so if I'm like digging for resources, it's one of the first places I go. So I would put that in your wheelhouse and bookmarks of, if you're trying to find something, he's probably done a blog post on it. And if not, you might discover some interesting things that you didn't know existed. So check that out, Gurney Journey. And that's, I don't even know how you spell Gurney.
G-U-R-N-E-Y?
That sounds close.
I think. Yeah.
You put that in Google, it will correct it if it's wrong. All right, so I'm gonna take my own advice and move on to the next flower. I'm already can tell that I'm going to run out of like a lot of real estate here because I have 3 different colored flowers in this painting. But I'm going to keep mixing. That's another good thing though. I'm going to keep mixing into these piles of paint though, because if I kind of like work both piles of paint into each other, then there is going to be a harmony amongst the flowers, even though they're different colors. So it's just kind of a good positive rule of thumb.
I think along those lines, seeing in, where you can use the same color or grouping of colors in multiple areas. And so things aren't just in isolation, finding where things are cohesive and similar. Doing these paintings from life at East Oaks always reminds me of color studies at Florence Academy, where the first term of each trimester in third year, we would have to do one session color studies, meaning 3 hours with the model color studies every day, different one. And it was such a useful such a useful exercise.
Mm.
So good. Really learning to consolidate your decision making and have that suggested brushwork rather than trying to do every little detail.
Yep.
And helping with your pace. And then really, you're not making mini paintings, you're making a color study. So,
Yep.
really understanding different environments, different colors, different skin tones, and how they all wrap together. Really useful.
Sam asks, have you guys heard of Alberti? If so, what do you think of him?
I don't think I have.
If we're talking about an artist, I might know the work before I'll know his name. Is often my response to that kind of thing. I feel like I've heard the name before, but I'm drawing a blank.
I know that I've heard the name before, and I'm scratching my brain.
The funny thing is like I'll probably see it and be like, oh, I know, I
Yeah,
love that
that
guy,
always happens.
or girl, for that matter. But Alberti sounds more like it might be a guy's name. Like I'm trying to go into my art history, but I'm also going, is this contemporary? Like who is this person? Send us a link.
Name. Is there a first name?
I feel it's Giovanni Alberti or something.
Okay.
I don't know. Sam, if you know any titles of the works that we could take a look at, I'd be curious. So I think the answer is maybe.
We maybe do. That's a really good, solid answer.
Yeah.
We maybe do.
It's kind of like, I don't know if anybody else out there can relate to this, but having an interaction with someone where you're just you've met them before, but you're just oh,
how do I know you?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Hey, fella.
Yeah, we're better with faces than names. We can remember the painting, but not the guy. And let's see, Jeff says, you are amazing artists and teachers. I've been fancying to open my own studio and host workshops too. Do you have anything you're willing to share on that aspect? How to be a good and successful educator?
Ooh. One is, I would say, I think that the one thing is to be true to yourself of understanding, do you believe that you have a heart of a teacher? And if you do, because there's a lot of people that feel like may open something up because they feel like it might be the best route for them, but to really be real with yourself and realize do I want to devote myself to these other people and making sure that almost above my own, I want their success. And so this is more of a mental approach. Secondarily is if you do have the heart of a teacher and you do care about really wanting these people, whoever it may be, to be successful, is what is it about, what are your gifts of how you approach them? And then thirdly, let's talk about that real quick on the gifts part. Some people are really good at being able to share analogy and be able to approach somebody and declare metaphor and try to use the metaphor to get the person to see, and then having different ways of approaching how they can help the person see. Some of my favorite teachers were just excellent listeners, and they would glean from what the student needed because of what issues they were having and really listening to their student. And then meeting them where they were. Other teachers are really good at using are reactionary. So they look at the work, they know what's wrong, and to know how to help them fix it. All of these have their own pitfalls and advantages, but Thirdly, some people are really good at structure and are good at creating curriculum and creating like a syllabus and A plus B equals C direction for their students. Whatever it is that you're gifted in, lean into that, but also learn its pitfalls. You know, for example, if you're a reactionary teacher and you go and you talk about like a person's work, to learn how to really understand your student so that you just don't blindly go in and go, you know what, that's wrong. You know, and that's wrong, and you should fix that. If your student is one that needs to takes criticism deeply and heavily, you might want to lead with what they might be doing right before you lead with what they're doing wrong. So, I feel like this is becoming a much larger lecture than the than the question was asking for, but that would be what I mean by knowing what your teaching style is. And then also allowing space, I have found has been very helpful. Most of learning happens from time logged and them discovering. And to have a good balance of allowing them to just have time to discover and then coming to them when they have deep questions or when you have an idea for them that you feel like might help them in their stage that they're in now. Hopefully that was helpful for you.
Erica, do you have any teaching tips from your teaching days in Florence?
Teaching tips. I think there are two things that come to mind right now. I'm sure if I had, if I spend a lot of time, I could come up with a much better answer than this. But the two things that come to mind, enthusiasm goes a long way. I think that sharing your genuine passion for the subject can help you a lot in communicating that, whatever is you need to be communicating for your students, and really getting you into the mindset. I think it will help people get past when things are difficult, inevitably difficult. Like that passion and love for the subject will help them get through it, I think. Second, I think slowing down and understanding what your first impressions are when you're critiquing a work, but then really slowing down and thinking about what are the priorities to tell somebody. So whether that is, because sometimes like throwing all the information at somebody when we're excited about it can overwhelm somebody, and also give an inaccurate impression of what they need to be thinking about with their own work. And so you could tell them, all of these things are wrong and like all of these things need to be changed, which is, very disheartening to hear. Or you can, really take a moment to look at the work, really understand what's working as well as what's not working, and then, only picking the priorities of things so that they really understand those concepts before moving on. So there's I don't know exactly like the perfect method of teaching, but I try to keep those things in mind, as I'm instructing.
That was beautiful, Erica.
Oh, thanks.
Well, and I think that's such a great thing for us to be talking about, because that's so in line with the spirit of why we do these live streams and trying to foster a community that is based on quality arts education and the passion for painting, and for, kind of paying it forward and arming others with the tools that they need in this craft. Yeah, it's a beautiful pursuit. Thank you so much for your question. And Jackson also adds, that's a great point. I feel like you can really tell when a teacher is into it, and it makes such a difference. And I wholeheartedly agree.
you'll know when has a heart of a teacher when they when they're get excited when you're doing really well on something. You'll see them get excited about it. And the other thing is that any advances that you make in even in your career, they praise them. They love them. Like they get almost more excited about you making advancements in your career as you would. And that's not always the case. I've most certainly experienced the opposite of that before. And I've experienced it exactly that way before, where people do get super excited about your progression, as well as maybe even rewards and things that happen in your career and life as you advance in your journey as a painter. And there's nothing more special, I think, than that. It's like it makes you want to get up the next day and keep painting even harder. So
one thing I love about teaching is that it's about more than just me.
Mm-hmm.
Getting to share with other people things I find interesting and beautiful, and things I would have loved to have known, when I was a student, and getting really to share all that information. And, more people can enjoy more things through education. So, and I like that it's beyond me. It's not just my accomplishments or, XYZ. It's about more than that.
Yeah. Great questions tonight. Gets me excited just thinking about them.
It's really interesting to see the different approaches that you guys are taking so far.
I would call this the ugly stage of the painting. They all go through it, and some last longer than others, and then it just comes in at the end. So what's important is to not freak out at this stage, and I tell myself, and to just keep your focus, keep moving one bit at a time, and focus on those important things like drawing, and drawing meaning all of the concepts related to drawing, like proportion, value, edges, all of that stuff. And just take it one brushstroke at a time.
There's the mantra right there. One brushstroke at a time.
I remember back in the day we were filming Josh Larock doing a portrait workshop or video of his wife Laura, and he did the drawing, and we got, I'd say, maybe about an hour and a half in, maybe 2 hours into the painting of him, transferring the drawing and getting it on the painting and starting to paint it. And I mean, it was the ugly stage of the painting, And I remember we took a break for lunch and we took a picture of it. And I told him, I was like, you need to post this, in the sense that it's going to be so hopeful for people to realize that at this stage, it just looks bad because not all the stuff is on there yet. And that you need to go ahead and be able to see beyond that stage to know what it's going to be. And now this painting ended up being in the BP Portrait Awards finalists. And it's a gorgeous, gorgeous painting of his wife. But it was so good because once he had finished it, he did sort of a before and after and did just that on the post, where he was like, just so you know, this is where it can, you know, it feels like, and to breathe and be okay, and know that you know what it's going to look like and why you're doing the things, and sometimes you just have to trust your training. And you know, it's just a good, it was one of those life lesson moments.
Like every painting, the creation of every painting has its own lifespan, and you start
That's for sure.
like tabula rasa, blank slate, and then gradually it starts to hit puberty.
Yep. That's a great way of putting it.
But eventually,
The awkward stage.
The awkward stage is puberty.
I love that.
My painting's going through puberty right now.
eventually it becomes a fully functioning adult.
In this case, a beautiful flower.
Yeah, sometimes the painting doesn't, you know, look very good just because you're not done. Like, you're still got a lot to do.
And not to say that all my paintings turned out looking like fully functioning adults. You know, there's many of them
come
that I'm
on,
like,
professional portrait painter.
no. There's some where this did not come out fully functional adult. I know real people that never became fully functioning adults. You know. Well, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I won't make you name them.
Yeah, I'm not going to say names, but I may have met a few in my life.
And I'm sure we've all had our moments.
Oh, my wife probably still thinks I'm not a fully functioning adult. She's gracious like that, though. She still tells me that she loves me anyway, you know.
I think it's such a good thing for people to hear and bear in mind, though, because I think it's really easy to be in progress on a painting and kind of like teeter-totter on like, oh, should I give up on it? Should I start over? Like, is it gonna get there? And just having the tenacity to keep going with it and not give up and not let the painting beat you. The only way it can beat you is if you abandon it. So,
Yep.
yeah.
I like that. Don't let the painting beat you. You know, usually at this stage, I'm just like, I just have fun trying to find ways to make the color harmonize with itself and go, oh, see, that looks good like that. It's not perfectly the color I see, but it's working with what I have going here. Obviously, that takes time to learn, but also just knowledge of color. But it's also just a bit of a discovery too. Like when I'm working on these things right now, I'm discovering a few things that's like, oh, see, now that looks good with that. You know, I like that. Let's try that again. And then sometimes you get excited about a brush mark that you made, and you liked it so much that you start like making that same one on the same spot, and then you just completely kill it. Like, oh, that was awesome. Let's do that again. And then you're like, oh, I just ruined it.
It happens.
You know, leave it.
Well, and there's something to like leaving room for serendipity and creating a cohesive rhythm.
Look at you ladies just dropping truth bombs tonight. Not gonna lie, everyone, I am surrounded by strong, amazing women every day.
Erica, it's really cool to see how you're mapping out the light on those blooms.
Oh, thanks. I think, well, another key thing is to have fun with it. So actually, enjoying that part. So I'm happy it's coming through. One thing, though, is that I can't have too much fun with it because I have the whole rest of the painting to cover, so I can't get too excited about that one area. But I do want I do want to spend some time because it's my brightest bright, and so I do want to make sure, keying-wise, that things are making sense in relation to that area. So it is worth spending a little more time on.
So how's everyone out there? Is anyone painting along tonight? Anyone painting flowers or a portrait while they're listening to us? Jibber jabber about all sorts of things. Tell us what you're working on.
Sam came back. The name was Leon Battista Alberti.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
absolutely.
Ted?
Isn't that how it always goes? We're just...
I was like, I need more.
You know, that goes to something that's interesting, because we're Last Portrait Society. Michael Shane Neal goes by Shane, but was talking about this, that he started going by, at least writing his name and signature, that all the greats wrote their signature in all three names. So it was, and he went through like all of them, like Everett Raymond Kinsler, and you know, it was a lot of like the great signature people, you know, John Singer Sargent, and you know, so on and so forth. But that kind of brings up a good point. It's like when you spouted out his whole name, we're like, oh, of course, you know. So maybe I should start going by my full name. Good old Robert Louis Carr.
It has to be
Rebranding it. It has to be 3. Yeah.
No one will ever know my first name. Let's see. Jackson asks, you touched on this a little bit, but do you mostly think of color as relational within your painting, or more matching what you actually see, or does it depend on the piece?
Eric, I'm going to toss that up to you. I have my answer, but I'm going to let you go first if you wish.
So one thing that's important to remember is that nature is infinity and our paint is inherently limited. So we won't be able to ever truly color match to nature. And I find that to be a way of actually letting go from the pressure of having to copy something that, especially, I mean, we're working under electric light tonight, but if you work in natural light or if you work outside, like everything's always changing constantly, every day, all the time. And, you know, how we're perceiving things changes. So color in its relationships, and particularly value relationships, is a good place to start. And then chroma and saturation, temperature, you know, all of those kinds of relationships. I think it's important to think of things in that sense for that reason.
Yes, I 100% agree. You know, and I'm not even going to really add, because there's not anything I could say that's any better than that. But all paint doesn't exist in a vacuum, you know. I listened to this podcast called Away with Words, and it's just like a lexicon and history of words and idioms and cliches and phrases. And the guy used to work for a dictionary company where he helped create definitions of words. But he over-iterates all the time that no words exist in a vacuum. All words only have identity when they're put next to other words.
Just like color.
And color is the exact same way. No color exists in a vacuum. It is very much related. And all you have to do is show somebody an illusion of simultaneous contrast of color, and you'll think that a color is blue when it's actually gray, if it's in environment, or are surrounded by other color, because the way our brain perceives and sees things are in relationship to color. And then we see them with our eyes, but our brain registers them in very particular ways. So, yeah, that was a great example.
It's like syntax in the language of color.
Yes.
That's beautiful. Kenzie Klein says she's working on a self-portrait right now.
Nice.
And Jeff Name is painting a dog in a flower field.
Oh, sweet.
That's awesome. I'm glad y'all are painting along with us. That's great.
Yeah, it makes me so happy. Feeling like these flowers are a little small, so I'm just kind of like expanding them, making them a little bit bigger. If sometimes I sound like I've got like the Bob Ross voice, I'm totally trying.
I was just thinking that.
Totally trying.
Happy little flower.
Yeah. This is your painting. Make it what you want. I just always think about, like, as a child, as like a crazy, hyperactive, full of energy kid running around like a chicken with his head cut off. There's something about Bob Ross that, like, he could just start talking, and all of a sudden I would just stop in my tracks, sit, and I could just watch him and not move. You know, so that's a spellbinding power there, if you can do that.
Yeah, with some of the technical issues involved here, I'm not sure that we're quite as meditative as Bob Ross.
If you hear a little rattle in my voice, it's a little bit of PTSD from all of the things that have happened today.
So, Lewis, is your approach to these tulips really kind of similar to the rose, or are you thinking about them differently in their structure?
I definitely am thinking about them slightly differently in form, because the form is more like a satellite dish versus a sphere. And so you're thinking about the concavity of it versus the convexity of it. So in that sense, yes, it is a bit different. But the approach for, like, its harmony and kind of laying down the basic colors of it are pretty much the same. Like, I'll go back in with the next layer in a minute, starting at the top rows and working my way down where I kind of put more edge work in. But at this stage, I'm going to just create just a touch more in the design of the background before I keep moving, so that it makes sense as well. And just give it a little bit lower value too. I think it's just a little high. And just a tiny hint more color that will relate to, like, the rose and the tulip in the lower part. Honestly, I probably should be using a little bit bigger brush, but here we are.
It's the make it work moment.
Yep, exactly. Just adding a little more paint too, because I made it so thin at the beginning. Now that I've got some stuff down, I'm going to just start making it a little bit thicker.
Question for the both of you. When working with a subject that can have such high chroma as flowers, do you have any advice on how to balance chroma throughout the composition?
This is what I've been working on a lot. That same idea. Sorry, I was
Since you were working on it a lot, I thought you were
should I
follow
say?
through with that
I
one.
don't know if maybe the expert can do it.
Any clues to how to help balance the chroma? Yes. So it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is that for example, my flower to the right, my other rose to the right of the pink one is very yellow green. However, one way to harmonize them is that I made a yellow green puddle right next and kind of in conjunction to the colors that I mixed for the pink rose. And so what it ended up doing is I changed the color harmony of it a little bit using some of the pink rose's colors into it so that they both felt like they were more closely related while still making it feel like it was a yellow rose. And so on the back side of the yellow rose, I was putting a little bit more of a violet color, which is also kind of the environment color. And by doing that, it's creating a harmony between those two roses. And then I, in turn, mixed into the next part of the puddle these tulips and what their color kind of is going to be. And that allows for things not to get too contrasty and almost creates a form of tonality in your painting. And then the background, even though I have it with multiple colors and have like these blues and stuff hitting, the goal is that it's kind of like a broken color of neutral that still seems to be playing in the piece, and that's kind of the goal there.
A lot of these decisions are things that when you're looking at the setup, you can almost decide ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
You decide where you're making sure that your high chroma areas read as high chroma because other things are less chromatic in relationship to those areas.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, something that's like maybe you don't want it to be in the foreground, you don't want it to catch your attention. I'm looking at example for some of the cast shadows on the tabletop. You know, they are cooler and they are, have different colors, but at the same time, you don't want to put like pure blue, maybe, cobalt blue in that area, or else it's really going to grab your attention. So understanding the color relationships as a whole at the beginning before you put paint to canvas,
Yep.
I think is helpful.
Yep, that's great. Good question. It's interesting. I always feel like sometimes I start like smaller with the like say the flowers or the objects in my piece, but then I'm like, okay, no, I need to make them bigger. There's too much negative space. So this is one of those things where I was talking about earlier, where if you feel like something's going to be more truthful to the painting, don't be afraid to try to fix it and make it work for the painting. Because what you're doing is you're observing something, but you are the master of this, painting universe, and you should think about what decisions you need to make your sort of painted universe beautiful. And so I think making the flowers a bit larger is going to help that. And it doesn't mean I'm doing a lot of it. I'm just slightly inflating them just a bit to make them fit better in the painting.
Is there any time that you felt like in a painting where there's something that you want to tweak or change, maybe the scale of, but you've already kind of passed what feels like a point of no return? Like, at what point would you recommend people to just commit? Or should they at all? Should they always be willing to change that?
What a great question. That's every painting. I think every painting, I have moments where I've reached a point of no return-ish, and I'm like, I want to fix that thing. And sometimes I do, depending on how dire of a thing it is. I might, and sometimes I might not, depending on the situation. But like, for example, I was working on my self-portrait, and I had drawn out, I spent weeks designing the composition of the thing, setting up mirrors, getting it all ready, and I had my hand in a particular position that took me forever to figure out just exactly where I wanted my hand. And as I was painting it, I found myself to naturally do a tendency with my hand that was totally different than the painting. And I kept knowing that it was a better composition, and it was a better position for my hand because it was much more natural. And I kept telling myself, no, just don't worry about it. Just keep going with, you already made all these decisions. If you keep doing that to the rest of the painting, you'll never be done. And well, about a week later, I even painted the hand, and I was like, no, I can't handle it anymore. I've got to change it. And ended up changing it, and I am so glad I did. It made the painting so much stronger. So there are things in the painting I'm like, I wish I could have done that differently or that differently, but that I won't change because I think that it's not the amount of invested time to do the thing is not worth the reward that you receive.
Diminishing returns.
Yes, there's most certainly a law of diminishing returns to certain aspects of painting, that being one of them. So that being said, is no, you have to make a decision for you of where you are in your painting, whether or not it would be good for you and good for the painting.
Yeah, I think of there's almost like a hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
for the painting. For example, if you've discovered, midway through the painting that, I'm just thinking of a portrait, that the eye sockets are not aligned, you got to do that. You got to change it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, major things like that, certain anatomical things that don't make sense. You got to do it.
100%.
I remember doing long poses at Florence Academy and realizing that the head was like a few maybe centimeters too far ahead, and only having like a short period of time needing to change it, and you're like, I gotta do it, like I gotta move it.
Yeah. Oh.
But it's important. Then going through those things, you end up not repeating those mistakes.
Yeah, that's
in
true.
the future, because you're like, I don't want to have to move a whole arm or a whole head or like important things later.
That's such a great point.
But at the same time, it's so important to have grace with yourself as you experience these things that inevitably you'll have to adjust in the painting. I don't know anybody where it happens where you make a design, you transfer your drawing, and everything just goes perfectly the whole way through, and you have no adjustment. I think there's always that. You look at the painting and you respond to it. I think there's always that engagement that's happening throughout the process. And so if you end up, you're like, oh, I have to change something, or I got something off and I have to rework it. It's just natural. And sometimes you don't see things until you get to a certain stage. And so I think it's important to remind yourself that it's just all part of the process. And I think when you think of things like that, then you're more willing to be more flexible, because it doesn't feel like it's actually that much of a problem to change things.
Very well said. I was just checking the time.
Oh yeah, we are at
no
8:20.
idea.
Yeah, I know. I'm cool seeing that we like lost at least 30 minutes. If as long as our dear volunteer over there, Miss Evie, is okay with it, that we kind of go over another
yeah.
30 minutes or so for our audience and for the painters.
Yes, please.
Yeah, you guys keep going. And for folks out there, just to compensate for some of the time that we lost earlier, I think we will go a little bit longer today. So if you are willing and able to stick around, that'd be great. So at this point in the process, are you guys thinking a lot about your edges?
I'm about to. Right now I'm still slightly working on just making sure I like where the composition and how things are being composed. But as soon as I'm like finished with that part of the stage, yes, I'll start thinking more about edges, more about heavier, thicker paint, how those colors are playing with each other, all of that kind of stuff.
I'm naturally just a bit slower, so I'm still covering the canvas, obviously. I do try to like always have edges in the back of my mind as I'm working, but letting things be a little bit more connected earlier, and then it's easier to pull things out later. It's easier to sharpen stuff later. So if you can get things unified and connected, it ends up serving you better.
Mm-hmm. Yep, continues to go. And that's the other thing is pace in a painting is very different from artist to artist, and to not compare yourself to how an artist paces themselves in a painting versus you, because
so important.
That it's so easy to compare yourself in that field, and it's not worth it. It's a moot point, because they're taking approaches that might take less time to do, but your approaches might take more, and they are both beautiful. They just have a different way of approaching it and come up with different effects, and some effects just take longer than others to produce. So don't ever be discouraged if you're like faster or slower. I remember talking to Paul Newton, who's a fantastic portrait painter. He just got done painting Gene Hackman and his wife recently, and he's an Australian painter. And we were talking at last Portrait Society, and he was saying, somebody asked him about, well, do you ever participate in the face-offs, which is like an alla prima quick portrait sketch thing that a lot of the known painters will do, that are invited to do at the beginning of the opening ceremony of Portrait Society. And he goes, oh no, I'd never do that. I'm so amazed that people can get, a likeness and paint as fast as they can. I'm a slow painter. I don't paint like that. That's not the way I paint. And he said it so gracefully in a way that was just like, I have such high respect for those people, what they do, but also with the confidence to go, that's not what I do. And I'm okay. And not only am I okay with it, alla prima painting is like jazz compared to indirect painting, which is more like, classical, in the sense that you're working on all these layers and edits and lots of different thought going through. And the other one is more of like what is happening. It's almost in a way performance art put on canvas, and so they both have different feels and different beauties to them.
I think there's also an element when you're a student It's so important not to compare yourself to others. So important to be where you're at and stay present with that, because it's just ultimately a distraction to judge yourself in relationship to where another student's pace is.
Yep.
You know, as kind of harsh as it sounds, it's like it's irrelevant where they are. It's only relevant for you where you are. So don't let that kind of stuff distract you on your journey.
Well, and that's why there's such value in, saving a painting that maybe wasn't your most successful work and looking back on it later, because there is value in, when you're a student, in comparing yourself to yourself.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Keep all your old paintings and look back on them and see, oh, this is the progress that I've made, and these are things that I know now I would have done differently here. I think that's a really valuable education for everybody.
Yeah, having sort of a personal record-setting goal thing for you is, I think, very, very helpful.
Benjamin Lester just stated that pretty well. He says, no stage of development is more valid than any other. Very true. The pursuit is value in and of itself.
Yes. I'm going to have to go get more paint because I have to get thicker in order for it to lay down. All right, I'm going to stop fussing with the background, start working on the foreground again.
So in order to lay more paint down, like when you're painting alla prima, are you mindfully trying to stay thin as you go? Because I know that tends to be your inclination, but in moments where you find like, oh no, I have to lay more on, is that an approach that you embrace, or is it something that feels kind of like, oh no, I'm kind of fighting with it?
I have learned to embrace it more later, but I think that we all have tendencies, and we all have to always train ourselves in the opposite way that our tendencies go in order for us to be versatile painters. So to make that point is, yes, it's always a challenge for me, but I have found in alla prima have gotten over it in the sense that I have just not only discovered the benefit, but gotten experience in benefiting from painting thicker paints, because it ends up being just a problem-solving situation where you go, oh, okay, well I for the longest time couldn't figure out what it was, but was scared to add more paint and realized later, oh, that's exactly what I needed to do. I needed to add more paint, and that's what fixes some issue that I was having when I'm painting at the beginning thin. Some people paint dry in order to avoid the thin paint scenario. And so where it gets a bit slippery. But where I really learned that lesson was when Scott Burdick came and painted over here one time. And he was like, oh yeah, no, whenever you're not ready, whenever you need to edit something when you're painting alla prima, just add thicker paint. And he just said it so lightly,
Yeah.
and so and as soon as he said it, he just goes and takes some completely dark area and makes it very light, and then like a really light area and just made it really dark. And I was like, holy cow. Okay, yeah, I'm not doing this right. But he's a great person to watch do that. It's like magic. It's so much fun.
I think that's such a beautiful part of alla prima painting as well, of like, there's a beautiful space that you create for yourself to play and experiment. And if you find, oh, it's getting a little slippery here, or, oh, I maybe went a little too thick here, you have the room to give yourself to figure that out and take that, you know, if you're somebody that tends to work more indirect than direct, you can take those lessons from Alla Prima and take them into your practice. Or if Alla Prima is your practice, then hey, power to you. That's incredible.
Well, I think varying your, at least just for exercises, I think varying your pace
Oh, so
is
good.
so helpful. You learn so much. Sometimes, I mean, I bring back to when we had to do these studies at school. Like, I remember in certain stages thinking, okay, I had to spend this much time on the block end and then, you know, this much time on, you know, laying in my shadow shapes and blah, blah, blah. And then realizing, oh, I can actually consolidate this in one step. And then you learn, okay, I can maybe be more efficient than I thought. Or maybe maybe it's just learning how to paint the wet and wet more, and learning what edges you can make, or, you know, different effects, paint application, like you said, with thick paint. There's so much opportunity when you vary how long you're spending on something, and you know, there's so much to learn.
Yeah.
John Smith asks, what's your opinion on working Alla Prima in a section by section manner for the long effort paintings versus layering all over the canvas using transparent mediums? Which do you prefer and why?
You go ahead.
I'll have to think about it for a second.
Okay.
So I can only really speak for my own approach and how I was taught. And for me, the advantage of not working alla prima everywhere, or any section by section, is when you start working with the whole, you get to understand the relationships of different areas to each other within the painting. For example, understanding your focal area in relationship to your non-focal areas, or value relationships. It can be easier to work if you're working a little bit of everywhere at once. Then you can understand or you can judge your painting and understand those relationships. Now, it's a very simplistic way of describing it, because I'm just saying, not in my own paintings, it's not like I only do that or I have to work everywhere all at once. But my only maybe thing to consider when you're working is to not have things piecemeal, because you're paying attention to one section, letting it go, and then painting another section, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But maybe your method doesn't do that, and maybe you're fine with how you're approaching it. Or maybe you're working from a study, so you already know where the painting is going before you are putting paint to canvas. So, but just things to keep in mind with your method. I mean, I find that I'm always thinking about my method, always thinking, always engaging with the process, and it's never super fixed. And if I have a method, there's always something that I have to make sure I balance with it. So it's really, really interesting question.
I definitely think that there's two approaches to that, and you have to train yourself on both. But I paint more towards the direction that Erica is talking. However, I mean, there's plenty of alla prima painters that paint far more sequentially in the direction that you're speaking about. And so I think at the end of the day, you have a tendency to want to paint a certain way, but also you have a type of direction that you are inspired by. If you're inspired by the artists that are painting that way, like it's more sequential, then and you find that your tendency is to paint more that way, then give it a shot and give it the college try. Like, actually really pay attention to certain things and work really hard on. You have to be really good at accurate drawing if you're painting sequentially, because you can end up with an incredibly wonky painting in that way. So keep that in mind if you plan on given that an approach. So, and certain people have a tendency to do that and just lean into it and keep learning that direction, and not kind of go back and forth. Like work on one, get really good at one, and then go and work on another.
Yeah, yeah. Though I do, I want to make sure I say this, that for certain paintings, especially if you're painting flowers or something that changes quickly, sometimes it's necessary to do that kind of, I have to work on this today because it's going to change on me. So I've done paintings where I've worked in that manner, where I've had to paint in a way a la prima, section by section, out of necessity.
Yeah.
And then it was great because I could get each part, as it was going, I could, adapt to it in a nice way. But there was also the caveat of I couldn't work if I didn't key something properly, then it was difficult to work back into it and have the language of my painting still be cohesive with how I originally painted it. And so I have a painting in mind where I was working back and forth with that because out of necessity again, I had to paint the flowers quickly before they died, and some things were too bright or some things were too gray, and then I needed to rework things, and it was a challenge.
That's really good though.
Oh, I learned so much from it. And then each time you do it, it's like the next time I am better at keying because I experienced those challenges,
Yeah, totally.
But that's where I reiterate, like, how you think about the entire picture in your brain at the beginning of the painting. Like, the better you can understand where it's going earlier, it'll really help you along the way.
One of the reasons color studies are such a great thing.
So useful.
Yeah, that's a practice that we do a lot here because when you're learning color, because it takes sort of the inhibitions out of the way of trying to make a perfect painting, and you are more in this like I need to investigate what's going on frame of mind.
Color studies and value studies, where you're not even using color, you're just doing charcoal or something. There's such useful tools also for understanding the mood of the painting and, for lack of better words, the vibe.
Yeah,
I hate that word, but sometimes it's the best way of describing something.
It's a technical term.
It's the vibe.
Yeah.
But understanding how it's going to feel, your values and colors all influence that. So doing studies is such a good tool. I feel like I always advocate for doing color studies and value studies on Painting from Life, telling people to do that.
It's good. Keep going. I'm down for it.
Down with the vibe.
I'm down with the vibe.
It's just not the vibe. I'm imagining like giving somebody a critique. We're like, this is just not the vibe.
Not the vibe. Sorry. Start over.
Don't do that. To the person asking about teaching methods.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't do that.
Please.
Don't use that.
Yeah. Don't take that advice from here.
So as you guys are starting to get more specific with your brushwork on the florals, what are you thinking in terms of like balancing the specificity of the petal while retaining the overall form of the flower itself?
Well, the good thing is that the form feels pretty established with just like the like hierarchy of value that I went through, value, hue, and chroma I went through earlier. And since it's wet, it helps keep it established for you. So I think that's partially how I keep the detail relating to, it's kind of like I already have this roadmap in front of me, and I just need to keep walking and marching down that roadmap. It's funny as it may sound. It's just that easy.
You get it right the first time?
Yeah, I just get it right the first time. But yeah, I think it's more about now just like finding smaller planes, and more importantly, finding edges that are important edges to put in for defining the piece. But it takes time, and be okay if like something goes wrong and you need to try again, do it again. Paint can be very forgiving that way. Sometimes you have to, there's a learning curve of knowing how to paint in a way to recover, but the paint itself is pretty forgiving.
When painting florals, do you guys find, are there any particular brushes that you tend to gravitate towards? Or like, do you ever set up a challenge for yourself of like, oh, I'm gonna try to not use a filbert on this and try to do it with something else? Or like, I don't know, what's your approach to selecting brushes for florals?
That's a great question for you, Erica.
I was going to say,
you've had
I
a
don't
lot
know.
of experience.
Honestly, I still feel like I'm figuring it out.
Oh, okay. Sorry to put you on the spot there.
No. I mean, it's the honest answer. I say that because there are times where I do something, I'm like, yes, I know how to do that. I know how to get this look, and it's working. And then I do it in a different painting, and I'm like, that's not what I expected to happen. And so, for example, there are times where I feel like, okay, a pointed round is like natural pointed round, larger than you expect, can be a really good tool. But then there are times where I've tried it, I'm like, this is not at all what I'm trying to do. So it's a challenge. I think that actually, if florals is too generalized, I think it just depends on what kind of plane you're working with and what kind of effect you're going for. So I think that, for example, a larger, a larger brush, where is it? Let's see. One second as I find this. Like a decently sized filbert. I mean, for a small flower. This can get you a long way for something small, actually. And then sometimes, I will say this. I avoid the long, thin brushes for flowers. I find that does not help me, especially if I'm even trying to do something where it's like a rim, like if it's too long and skinny.
Like this one?
No.
Oh, okay.
That's great because it's actually thicker. I'm talking about like, even this one, the one that I've
Oh,
used,
yeah.
like it ends
Yeah.
up making things really linear in
Yeah.
a way that I don't really think is effective. And so this answer is going all over the place.
No,
I don't
it's
know if
good.
it's coherent at all or helpful, but honestly, the takeaway is experiment with different brush shapes, see what effects you can make with them, and try to find a variety of brushes and using them, because you can get some really interesting effects. That's my takeaway.
Yep, that's good. I do have a tendency to use several different brushes. I use rounds when I'm trying to do things that feel a bit more random. But when it comes to like trying to make good edge work, I tend to go towards the flats. But if I'm trying to get some of this smaller like razor edges, I might use around here and there, but for the most part I'll just use I just like the way a flat can like turn an edge really easily that's very thin, and I can just tap it and you know, I don't know, it makes it really fun, and I think creates lovely effects. So but it most certainly is one of those things where it's like I keep, you play with it until you figure it out. I also sometimes, if I'm trying to like, if I'm getting too tight, I like to use like splayed edges to like keep my things soft for a little bit longer, so that I feel like I'm not committing too deeply to something in certain areas. But you know, that's the fun part of alla prima painting is that I think some of those inhibitions kind of leave, because you realize you have a limited amount of time, and you force yourself to be a bit more abbreviated and ask yourself, how can I make a very economical stroke with the limited amount of time that I have. So
Using a larger brush
Yes.
than your gut tells you sometimes is wise.
it's always a great, it's a
Like just like
great,
at least one level up
yep, yep.
can help you make more interesting shapes, for sure.
I got asked a question about like what if you could give like one piece of advice about you know, brushes, what would you say? And I think they were like gonna expect me to say something like flats or this and the other, and that was the question. That was what I told them. I was like,
Use a bigger brush.
a bigger brush, always bigger than you expect to use, and you might be pleasantly surprised.
Like just the kind of question you're asking yourself of seeing what you can unify, like what can I group together?
Yep.
You know, and being curious about that can lead to some really interesting brushwork.
I think that's something that also is really helpful for, for everybody to hear, but I think especially for beginners to hear, because I know for me personally, when I started out, one of the things that I was doing was always painting with the teeniest, tiniest little round I could find, because I thought that would allow me to get the greatest degree of detail.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people jump to that conclusion without realizing that, you know, a teeny tiny brush actually interacts with the least amount of paint possible on the surface.
That's a great point. Yeah, you find there's so much about painting that's counterintuitive. You find that a larger brush you feel like would give you less control, when in fact it does just the opposite. Sometimes it gives you more control over your painting.
I feel like that with quantity of medium. Sometimes people
Yep.
have really wet paint, thinking it'll help them with control, when it can actually make things really slippery.
Yep. All right, we're gonna go to the next flower, so that I don't just spend all of my energy on this guy, just as I would want to. He's a fun guy. He's fun to hang out
That
with.
rose will probably stick around for another couple weeks.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? This rose, ladies and gentlemen, it wins the grand prize
Champion.
for longevity.
Yeah, Erica, when did you first get that rose?
At least a month ago. At least.
It's just incredible.
I wanted to ask both of you, just because it's kind of a funny coincidence that like the way that you've filled out your surfaces is kind of compositionally similar overall, of leaving some negative unaddressed space
Oh yeah?
in very much
Oh,
the
that's
same,
so true.
the same kind of way.
Look at that. Look at
Even though
that.
you're both painting different
Like,
parts
totally
of the,
different, yeah.
the still life.
Yeah.
That's cool.
What's your thought process behind the intentionality of that, of like leaving empty space on the surface and creating just like a really gorgeous impression of a part of a vision? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could say that this is a beautiful, intentional, compositional choice that I made, but it's really because I'm working on limited time and I'm working on my focal flower out, and I just can't address this right now.
But no, that's totally like what I was wondering though,
Yeah.
because it's creating a focal point and working out from it.
It might be that I'll leave it if it works. Like, I'm always watching in that sense, like to take advantage of happy accidents. But my original idea was to do all the things. I just don't have time, so I'm working on where I can.
Part of it is intentional, but I mean, there is a part of it that's very similar to what Eric is saying, is that like a level of importance, of focus, that's going to have one of the least. And I also am thinking about like where I want to leave negative space, because there's some spots where I've like thought, oh, I might want to pull out more paint in that spot so that there ends up being this like interesting design in the just the shape of the composition. The shape of the composition is something that always intrigues me, even if it's alla prima or a very finished painting. And sometimes I feel like I'm successful at it, and sometimes I feel like I'm not. Regardless, it's a pursuit that I'm always trying to have in my work. That being said, is in this instance, you know, I actually thought about putting some sort of design of leaf or something over here. In fact, I probably should have like increased even more with these flowers and bunched them in a slightly different way so that they came out closer to the edges. And since they don't, I have to play with the negative space to feel interesting, so that the space still feels like it's being utilized in an artful way. Otherwise, it just looks like tiny flowers on a really large canvas. And so that's something that I'm considering while I'm working on these things as well.
It's always an adapting process.
Yeah, totally.
Benjamin asks, my art made the cover of the Dallas Voice last week. Congratulations.
Hey.
And then he asks, how do y'all deal with that kind of validation? Every time someone brought it up, I shut down and wanted to disengage with the conversation.
Oh no. Say thank you and enjoy the wins.
You know, this is a great point. I love this. You know, and Erica's so good about bringing these kinds of things up too, because we live in a society where we feel like if we are to if someone gives us that accolade, that we need to like have a humility about us. Well, you should, but at the same time, the validations, I always say validation is for parking because it's very few and far between opportunities that you will be validated for the hard work that you've put into something. And the reason I say that is for the purpose of not letting that be your pursuit of why you do this. Praise should not be your pursuit. However, because they're few and far between, you should also use those as opportunities to revel and celebrate the fact that you have achieved a milestone that you have yet to achieve. And for that, there should be a level of importance. If a person is approaching you and recognizing that achievement, then they're excited for you and want to celebrate with you, and to say thank you and enjoy the being around people who enjoy your victories. Doesn't mean that you necessarily have to tell every person you come up to about it, but most certainly note that it's very important to celebrate your achievements, because there'll be times where it's a famine, and it's really great to be able to look back on times where people said, no, you are worth it, and it was worthwhile that you're doing what you're doing.
I think also, life is short and we don't know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have a positive moment like that, I think it's, honor it and, experience the gratitude, enjoy it, and then, it's only a moment. So
Yeah.
kind of enjoy it while it's there.
Yeah.
And
I think too,
it's okay.
for me personally, as somebody who has struggled with like anxiety before, it can be really difficult to receive in that moment.
Mm.
And I don't know if that's more of the angle of perhaps why you're asking, but I think sometimes it can be really hard to receive a compliment, and that in and of itself is a skill. And it's one that, as an artist, I think it's really important and valuable to learn that, yeah, compliments are okay, and you deserve compliments.
Mm-hmm.
And, just by picking up a paintbrush, you're doing the thing, and that's awesome.
And I think also, somebody else, like you're honoring the other person too, who selected your work for something, or
Yeah.
it's it's sharing in that experience too. So
Yep.
it's about you, but it's also not.
Mm-hmm.
And so, having, we're talking about gratitude already, but letting that exchange happen.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, being grateful to the people that gave you the honor and making sure to promote them is a really beautiful way of celebrating, because validating that they worked hard to figure out who was a person to recognize. It's helpful for them to feel the gratitude from the people that they worked hard to try to show the world that these people are worthwhile. So we're excited for you, and we celebrate with you, and so happy for you.
Artists supporting artists.
Woo!
Yay! All right, and additionally, let's see, B. Gill asks, what would you guys say are the biggest developments in your work and skills most recently? Or what is some advancement you've made lately in your practice?
What are some of the advancements in our skills as of late? Is that what the question was?
Yes. Yeah. Like what's an accomplishment or achievement or something you've learned lately?
Well, lately I've been working with doing more impasto work in and like working with heavier and thicker paint as part of my art making, and finding ways to incorporate that. Eric and I were talking about this earlier. Finding ways to incorporate that feels like part of the identity of the way you work already, and how to implement it the way that feels not only truthful to you, but more of like, does it fit the environment of paint handling that you already have in your work? And that's just like a fun discovery, like trying to discover what those things are, you know? So lately, I feel like that is one of the things that I've been working on, and it has been fun and exciting.
For me, it's been I have been working a lot on understanding and managing chroma. I would have a tendency of wanting to get into all the colors all the time, and learning to have things be meaningful by understanding the hierarchy of chroma. Just like you would have a hierarchy of edges or hierarchy of values, you have a hierarchy of chroma. And learning where to put what and being more sensitive to that. So part of when I'm working on flowers, we talked about this earlier. I think somebody brought it up about managing chroma and with chromatic subjects such as flowers. That's exactly been what I've been working on managing, and I feel like I've improved, but still have learning to do with how to make it all sync up.
Beauty of an artist, you never stop learning.
Yeah, you're never bored.
Yes. If you stopped learning, you need to stop doing this, because there's plenty to learn. You just have gotten over whatever it is that makes you, want to do it. Because there's so many fun things to discover about painting every day, and I don't know if I would be doing it if I felt like I had reached some sort of art summit.
I'm curious. That makes me want to ask you a question that you can totally say that you don't want to answer.
Oh, okay. Challenge accepted.
I'm going to wait on the challenge before I accept it.
Yeah, right.
Have you ever experienced quote unquote artist block?
Oh, yeah, that isn't hard for me to answer. Yes, absolutely. I think anyone who's a creator has experienced the creative block of whatever their field is. Now, I think artist block can be a little bit more of a broader term of how, the semantics of how we define it. But let's just say that one of the things as a creative that I do have in my advantage is that I'm mainly a commission painter. And so at the end of the day, in order to eat, I have to create. And so sometimes I don't have the luxury of artist block because number one, I already have the subject of what I want to paint. But most certainly there has been a couple of commissions where there's some parts of it left to interpretation that took me a very long time to solve, like a very, very long time to figure out. And so it is a real thing that every creative writer, photographer, everyone probably experiences. So absolutely. There's a wedding piece I'm about to work on that probably took me 9 months to solve, and I had to put it away because I just couldn't get my mind past it, and just would stare at it, just like point blank stare, and didn't know what to do. It's like, how am I going to solve this thing? And maybe if I stare at it long enough, it'll come to me. And there are those times where it has, where it just will come to you. It wasn't this one. That's for sure.
Do you have ways of managing those moments?
Yeah, sometimes just just putting your pencil on paper and trying to sketch things out and just doodling until, you know, with the liberty of realizing that you might not discover anything.
Yeah. Like
has
getting back
been-
into play.
Yeah.
Almost.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, I don't know why that felt like a really personal question to me. But
Oh, hey, I mean,
Thanks
it
for
might be for
answering.
some people. That's a good, that, you know, honestly, that's a great insight in its own right, because how many times have I asked a question to somebody where it would be very benign to me to answer, but it was very personal to them. And being, you know, all of a sudden they'd be triggered by it, and I'm like, well, oh, oh, that was a thing. I didn't realize that was a thing. And being, you know, sensitive to that as well.
well, and I feel like there's such value in talking about it because, you know, we're all human beings. We're not art machines. And collectively as human beings, we've all just gone through an insane couple of years. And, you know, I know a number of folks who went through creative blocks during that time. And I think that like being able to talk openly about that is, you know, very important and healing.
I do think there's something to say about, you know, we're not machines, like you said. So to expect like perfect creativity all the time, productivity all the time, like it's just not real. We ebb and flow naturally. It's just how we are wired. And again, we talked about this earlier, but having grace with yourself through those moments, it doesn't help to, sometimes if you are too hard on yourself or thinking too much about the result, when it's like, sometimes it's kind of life telling you need to take a moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Sometimes you have to listen to it.
Let's see. John says, I went to the Prix de West last year for the first time.
Oh,
and
nice.
was blown away by the overall caliber of art. Are there other similar annual exhibitions in the U.S. that rank as highly as that one?
Yes, maybe not as large as that one. I mean, you could say the, what was it, Hadley Invitational? Hartley? What was the one at Salmagundi?
Oh yeah, the Hartley Invitational.
The Hartley Invitational at Salmagundi Club had some of the most elite painters. You know, like for example, they had like Odd Nerdrum, and they had like Daniel Sprick, and a high caliber of art making. It wasn't Western, but the question that you're arising to or asking, I'm assuming is that it doesn't necessarily pertain to Western. It more pertains to, are there other places that are creating other events that are like this, that have high quality work, that are invitational only. And for those that don't know, Prix de West is an invite only show or conference to be shown. And so yes, there are a few. You'll have to seek them out because they're often like clubs or organizations that are more specific to geared to things. But you'd find them, I think, more in larger cities, you know, such as like LA and New York and that kind of stuff. But if you want to see things that are high caliber and medium caliber, and depending on maybe not your taste, you know, things like LA Art Show and some art fairs will have some really incredible works too. So. All right, I gotta get.
Well, I
really
guess that's
specific with
also
this guy.
maybe a good time. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just talking to myself. You go right ahead.
I was going to say that's maybe a good time just to tell folks that we're going to be at Portrait Society conference.
Yeah. yeah, so if anyone is coming to Portrait Society, I can't even talk, Portrait Society conference, please come by, say hey to us.
There's a big ant that's crawling up. I smash you, I'm sorry.
Oh, he was going to make some really great texture for you.
I have so many plein air paintings of like bugs in the sky. Proof that I planted them, painted them, and planted them.
Yeah, exactly. You see this pollen? This is
It's
proof I was
real.
there.
Just to give you guys a time check, we're at 9:10.
Okay.
How long are we going to?
2, 3 in the morning? You good with that?
Hey, I'm ready.
All of a sudden, like, Erica busts out of her, like, coat jacket, like, coffee, snacks.
I'm
You know.
ready.
How about, is 30 minutes too long for you, Evie? How are you feeling?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good to do whatever y'all want.
I mean, I considering all the mess ups, I could go for another hour if everybody's cool with it.
Yeah, Evie, when
know.
do you need to leave?
That's more about like you tell us when you feel like you want to leave.
And let it be whatever time you need it to be.
I don't
Yeah.
need to leave at any time. I'm seriously good.
Should we call it like 45 minutes?
Yeah, let's do 45
That way we're
minutes.
in the middle.
Yeah, let's do 10 o'clock.
Okay, perfect.
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock?
We're
Perfect.
done.
This is the democratic process
Yep.
at East Oak Studio.
I always say to people here, I'm nothing if not democratic. So everyone decide. If only the rest of the world could feel the same way. Or the rest of the U.S. at least.
If only the world could be as harmonious as your painting.
World would be quite a mess if we're talking about as harmonious as my painting is
I'm like,
right
yeah,
now.
maybe not mine.
But sweet of you to say, though, Evie.
So you guys are both painting two different species of flowers. Lewis has roses and tulips, whereas Erica has hellebores and something I don't know the name of that looks kind of like Queen Anne's lace.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Sorry, I'm just not very well versed in flowers. But I want to ask you, in painting two different species like this, are you actively trying to create a cohesion in your brush strokes between the two, or are you preferring to break it up a little bit in the way that you communicate? Yes, these are two very different flowers that have different petals and different structures.
I personally think it's cool when different areas of the painting feel like different textures, like glass feels like glass, something like a petal feels, the texture of that, where, the candle will feel waxy. I don't think my brushwork at this stage reflects that because I'm just trying to get everything to work out, but it is something in my paintings I do try to think about, particularly when I have more time. I think of this Chardin painting of, it's a still life, but there's cantaloupe in it, and the rind just looks like the rough rind of a cantaloupe, and it feels different from the air in the background and like other areas because of just the variety of paint application and how it's done. I just think that's so cool. So it's an ideal that I think about that maybe applies more to my other work and not for this one.
Yeah, I agree. I love it when people are able to do that. There's obviously other schools of thought of different approaches that you can do, and You know, but making the texture of the thing look like the thing is always a really fun challenge, and when you do it right, it can blow people away.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, it's just it had to do with, it was paint and it was the texture of the rind at the same time, where you're getting that flicker of the two things, the vibration of the two, because it was definitely paint that made it, and you could tell like almost like there was lead white in that mixture. You just know
Yeah.
it.
Oh yeah.
Where you can see that they weren't trying to paint every little detail, like you're painting the feel of the cantaloupe rind, and then really understanding how your paint works in order to achieve those different textures and feels of different surfaces.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good stuff. There's other things that I think are really interesting too. You know, where you can use the mark on you say like a Sargent painting or something, where he'll weave a hard edge with like one sort of quick, what looks quick probably, you know, he very thought out and meticulously thought out about how he was going to make that one mark. That might be like a sharp edge on one side, but then it covers an area that has like two soft edges on another, but it's not as much about like painting around the form, but it has this like some parts are heavy impasto and overlap with an underlap and a soft with a hard, and it's this like sing-songy unpredictability effect of how he makes the mark that sometimes makes things feel just like my mind's breaking looking at this, of like how cool, because every time I feel like I can predict looking at the next section of how he's supposed to be painting this, it's a different type of mark than I was expecting. It makes it very entertaining to the eye. It's not how I paint, but boy, I enjoy looking at it. Makes me want to try it.
Amira asks, any thoughts about window shading methods? Who were the best painters of that style?
Is that when, no, I don't know what this is.
Window shading is when you start in one section and you finish as you go down to the next section, almost kind of like you're going sort of down this like window.
I'm not familiar very much with that.
Who would be the best person?
Scott Waddell.
You know, I would say that, like, I mean, somebody who's very famous for this approach would be like Scott Waddell, probably. You know, because he just like tries to fully complete as he goes. You know, stage after stage. So, and he's an incredible instructor. He was one of my teachers, and I think that. There's probably very few teachers that were as good at being an instructor as he. But as far as other painters that I feel like do that as a method, that's it's kind of like different. There's like sequential painting, which I see a lot of like Alla Prima's people that'll start like with an eye and they'll work out of the eye, kind of like a Richard Schmid style. And I find that to be a little bit different because they're kind of starting in this like single spot and kind of moving outward. Whereas I feel like window shading is almost like, in a way, it feels like you're kind of printing across the page. That's a great way of training. I don't know anyone that does it as their main practice, aside from maybe like Scott, where they go space by space. So I don't know if I can answer that. But let me know what yours are. Would love to hear.